She walked slowly toward the stage, feeling every eye on her, and a heavy weight settled on her chest. The hall was full, bigger than she expected. The seats were already crowded with people who had come to see talent, to be entertained, to judge. The piano waited at the center, old but polished, its black surface reflecting the dim lights above. She reached it and paused for a moment, looking at the worn keys. She remembered the countless hours spent at a similar piano, sitting alone, fingers trembling, learning to make the music speak. Today felt different. The eyes of strangers were upon her now, eyes that whispered doubt, that carried judgment even before the first note. She pulled her chair closer to the piano, careful not to make a sound. Her hands hovered above the keys. The cool touch, bringing back memories she had long buried. There were whispers around her, small but sharp. Some people laughed quietly, some rolled their eyes, and others exchanged glances that spoke volumes. She knew she looked ordinary, almost too ordinary to stand out. She felt a wave of nerves, almost strong enough to make her turn around and leave. But she sat down, adjusted her posture, and took a deep breath. The crowd would not see the storm inside her. The trembling that ran from her fingertips up to her heart, the microphone on the stand caught her eye, and she realized it was meant to pick up the softest note she played. She imagined the sounds spreading through the hall, filling every corner. Her mind wandered to all the nights she had spent alone at the piano when no one listened but the empty room. Those nights had been her refuge, her way of speaking when words failed. Music had been her companion when life had been harsh, when laughter from others had felt like a cold wind. She wanted to remember that strength now, wanted to let it carry her fingers over the keys. But for a moment, she was trapped by fear. People in the audience were already settling into their judgment. Some whispered about her clothes, simple and unremarkable. Some stared at her thin frame and assumed her talent would match her plain appearance. A few laughed quietly, and it cut deeper than she expected. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to shut out the noise, trying to find the calm she had felt in those quiet nights of practice. She focused on the memory of the first song she had ever learned, the joy she had felt when she finally made it sound right, and slowly her hands began to move. The first note was hesitant, soft, almost shy.
Ow.
It made a small sound in the hall, but it was enough to grab attention. Some heads turned, some eyebrows raised, and a few who had been smirking paused. I felt a little encouragement from that. And she allowed herself to play another note, then another. The melody was fragile at first, but it carried a weight of something real, something deep. She had learned to pour her emotions into the music, to let the piano speak for what she could not. Each note became a tiny thread of her story, a story of years spent learning, failing, and getting up again. She glanced at the audience, trying not to be distracted. Faces that had laughed were now uncertain, curious, maybe even a little interested. She allowed herself a small smile, not for them, but for herself. She had faced fear before, though never like this. Here in front of strangers, every mistake would be seen, every hesitation judged, and yet she kept playing. Her hands remembered the keys better than her mind did. She let the music take over, let it flow naturally. She imagined herself back, in the empty room where music had been her friend, and slowly the anxiety melted away. The room was quiet now, except for the piano. The whispers faded into nothing as the melody began to grow stronger, more confident. She felt the rhythm deep in her chest, the pulse of her heartbeat matching the flow of the music. It was not about perfection, not about impressing anyone. It was about expressing something only she could express. And as she played, she felt the power of that truth. The laughter and judgment seemed distant, almost unreal. She focused on the sound, on the story in her fingers, and let it guide her. She thought about the people who had doubted her, who had whispered about her in the past, friends, acquaintances, strangers all, who had made her feel small, inadequate, unseen. She did not need to prove anything to them, but she wanted them to see what they had missed. Not for revenge, but for recognition that she existed in full, not the half-dream they imagined. Each note she played carried a piece of that desire, a little more courage and defiance with each chord. She felt herself growing stronger with the music, her back straighter, her hands surer. A few people in the audience leaned forward, caught by the unexpected depth of the sound. The piano, old and weathered, seemed to come alive under her touch. The melody twisted and turned, soft and delicate in one moment, bold and commanding in the next. She felt a smile forming on her face, not from the audience's reaction, but from the joy of creating something real, something that mattered. She remembered how it felt when she first played a song that moved her to tears, and now she was sharing that feeling with strangers, letting it reach them without words. She noticed a man at the back, arms crossed, frowning, skeptical. And then, slowly, he relaxed, his eyes widening as the melody found him. Another person, a young woman, had tears in her eyes, trying to hide them, touched by the emotion in the music. The room was changing, not because she wanted it to, but because the music was alive, speaking for her. She let herself feel that change, let it encourage her to play with more expression, more feeling. Her fingers moved faster, smoother, flowing over the keys with a confidence she had not known she possessed in front of others. The audience could no longer ignore her. The whispers had vanished, replaced by silence, a silence that spoke louder than any applause. She felt the electricity in the air, a connection she had only ever experienced in the quiet of practice rooms. Every note she played was a conversation, every chord a declaration of who she was. She was no longer just a nervous young woman on a stage. She was a storyteller, a creator, a person who could touch hearts with her music, even as she played. She felt small waves of doubt creep in. What if she made a mistake? What if someone laughed again? But she did not stop. I had learned that fear and music could coexist. The fear made her careful, made her aware, but the music gave her courage. She let the two work together, letting each note be a bridge over the uncertainty. Her hands flew over the keys, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce, but always with intention. She remembered all the nights of lonely practice, the mistakes, the starts and stops, and she let them fuel her performance. The piano seemed to respond to her every emotion, every flicker of thought, every heartbeat. It was as if the instrument knew her, knew the story she had lived, the struggles she had faced, and the joy she had found in music. She let herself sink into the moment, forgetting the audience, forgetting the stage, forgetting everything except the sound she was creating. The music was hers, but it was also theirs now, shared with anyone willing to listen. As she continued, she became aware of a subtle change in the crowd. Heads that had nodded skeptically now leaned in. Eyes that had been bored or dismissive now watched with curiosity, fascination, and awe. Some faces were soft with emotion, others wide with surprise. She did not need to look at them, for she could feel their attention, their awareness, and it pushed her to go further, to let the music soar, higher, deeper. Truer, the first song she had intended to play ended, but she did not stop. She transitioned smoothly into another, letting the melody flow naturally from one piece to the next. Each song told a part of her story, from fear to hope, from doubt to courage, from loneliness to connection. The music filled the hall, wrapping around the audience and creating a space where judgment no longer mattered, where laughter had no place. She felt a powerful sense of freedom, a liberation she had never experienced before in public. Her hands moved with precision and emotion, sometimes light, sometimes strong, always speaking. She could see the expressions of the people in the front rows, the subtle shifts in their posture, the way their eyes followed the movement of her fingers. They were caught in the story she was telling, even if they did not know it yet. And in that moment, she realized that this was the true purpose of her performance, not to prove them wrong, but to share a piece of herself, to let her music be a bridge between her inner world and the world outside. By the time she reached the final notes, her heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was from exhilaration, from the rush of giving everything she had and being received in full. The last chord lingered, hanging in the air like a whisper, a promise, a truth. And then silence fell. Silence so complete that it felt like the entire hall was holding its breath, unsure how to respond, stunned by what they had just heard. She remained seated for a moment, letting the silence wash over her, letting herself breathe. She could feel the weight of the audience's attention, the shift from judgment to awe. The same people who had whispered and laughed were now quiet, some with wide eyes, some with tears glistening, all caught in a moment that had begun with doubt and ended with wonder. She realized she had done it. She had played, she had told her story, and she had reached them. And in that, she found a strength she had never known she had. Slowly, the applause began, starting with a few hesitant claps that grew louder and stronger. The laughter and whispers were gone, replaced by genuine appreciation. She felt her shoulders relax, her chest open, her heart swell with a quiet joy. This moment was hers, and it was beautiful, not because of recognition or praise, but because she had faced fear and found her own voice. The stage no longer seemed big, the hall no longer overwhelming. She had transformed it, if only for a few minutes, into a place where music, courage, and truth could exist together. And in that, she felt complete. She left the stage and went to a quiet corner, her hands still tingling from the notes she had played. The applause lingered in her ears, a soft echo that reminded her of moments she had spent alone in her room, playing piano without anyone to hear. The excitement and fear of performing in front of strangers had been replaced with a wave of memories. She thought back to her childhood, to a small room with sunlight streaming through thin curtains, and a piano that had been her only companion. She had been a quiet child, shy, always watching, always learning, but never speaking much. The piano had listened to everything: her laughter, her tears, her whispered fears, and it had never judged her. Music had been a way to survive, a way to escape. Her family had struggled, and often there was tension in the house, sharp words, and moments of disappointment. But the piano was always there. Every evening, she would sit and press the keys, creating melodies that no one else could hear, but that made her feel alive. Those nights were her sanctuary. She remembered learning to play songs that she loved, copying notes from old books, listening to recordings, and trying again and again until her fingers could find the right chords. She had cried over mistakes and celebrated tiny victories, each one feeling monumental because it came from her own effort. Her parents had never been able to understand her passion. They had practical concerns: school, chores, responsibility. Music had seemed like a hobby, something that would not feed her or change her life. They'd sometimes asked her to stop playing or to focus on something more useful. But she had continued in secret, sneaking time on the piano whenever she could. Sometimes she would play late at night, when everyone else was asleep, letting her emotions flow freely into the melody. It had been her way of holding herself together when life felt too heavy. She remembered a teacher she had once loved, someone who had recognized her potential and encouraged her. That teacher had told her that music could speak when words failed, that it could move people in ways nothing else could. Those words had stayed with her for years, whispered in moments of doubt, reminding her that what she felt inside mattered, and that the world might one day hear it too. But life had been full of interruptions, responsibilities that pulled her away from the piano, and slowly, the music had become a memory rather than a daily companion. She thought about the friends she had lost along the way, people who had not understood the depth of her passion, who had teased her for spending so much time at the piano. Some had called her obsessive, others had laughed at her dreams. Each loss had been painful, but the piano had been constant. Even when she had felt rejected or invisible, she had known that she could create something beautiful, something lasting with her own hands. Those lessons had built a quiet strength in her, a resilience that she would not have realized otherwise. Now, standing away from the stage, she realized that all those years of practice and solitude had prepared her for this moment. The fear she had felt before playing had been strong, but it was only part of a bigger truth. She had worked for this. She had lived for this, and the music had always been ready to speak for her. She thought about how far she had come, from the lonely rooms to the stage, and she felt a mix of pride and humility. It was not about showing off or proving anyone wrong. It was about expressing herself, sharing a part of her soul that had been hidden for so long. Memories of small performances in school and community events floated into her mind. In those moments, she had felt the thrill of sharing her music, but also the sting of judgment. She had stumbled through songs, forgotten notes, and seen the disappointment in people's eyes. Each time, she had learned something new, not just about music, but about herself. She had learned patience, focus, and the courage to keep trying. Those lessons were now part of her, embedded in the way she moved her hands, in the way she breathed as she played, in the way she felt the emotion of each note. She remembered the times she had tried to express her feelings in words, only to find that they fell flat, were misunderstood, or dismissed. Music had been her language, her voice, when speech was inadequate. The piano had carried her emotions, transformed her pain into something tangible, something that could be shared without fear of rejection. She realized that this was why she had continued to play despite all obstacles. It was not for recognition, it was not for applause. It was for the need to communicate something deep and real. Her mind drifted to a particular evening when she had been very young. It had been raining, and she had sat by the window, watching the drops slide down the glass. Her hands had found the keys almost without thought, and she had played a simple song she had learned from an old book. The melody had been imperfect, but it had carried all her feelings of loneliness, longing, and hope. She had felt a strange kind of connection to the world in that moment, as if the rain, the piano, and her own heart were in perfect harmony. She had never forgotten that feeling. It had stayed with her through all the years of struggle and doubt. The memory brought a quiet smile to her face. She realized that the music had always been a mirror of her life, reflecting her struggles, her joys, and her quiet victories. Every note she had played on the stage that day had roots in those private moments. In the nights spent alone, in the tears and laughter she had hidden from others. The music was not just a skill she had learned, it was a part of who she was. And now, for the first time in a long time, she had shared it openly, without shame or fear. She thought about the crowd again, about how they had laughed at first, how they had doubted her. She understood why. She looked ordinary, simple, perhaps even unremarkable, and it was easy to make assumptions. But assumptions were always shallow, and music had a way of cutting through them. The applause, the silence, the attention she had received, all of it, was a testament to the truth she had carried with her all these years. She had known her own worth even when no one else did, and now it had been revealed to them in the most honest way possible. As she reflected on her past, also thought about the future. The performance had opened a door, a possibility she had not dared to imagine before. Perhaps she could continue sharing her music. Perhaps she could find others who would listen and understand. The thought filled her with cautious excitement. She knew it would not be easy. The world was full of challenges and distractions, but she also knew that the strength she had built over the years would carry her through. Music had been her guide, and it would continue to be. She remembered a particular friend from childhood, someone who had encouraged her in secret, who had once whispered that her music could touch hearts if she let it. That friend had moved away and life had pulled them apart, but the memory of their belief had stayed with her. It had been like a small flame, a reminder that she was not entirely alone, that there had always been someone who saw her potential. Now, she felt that flame grow stronger, fueled by the experience on stage, by the realization that she could reach people beyond her immediate circle. Her hands were still trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the release of emotion she had carried for so long. She remembered the first time she had played in front of an audience, a tiny group of family and neighbors, and the shame she had felt when mistakes had been noticed. She had learned to hide her disappointment, to smile through embarrassment, but it had left a mark. Over the years, she had slowly unlearned that fear, replacing it with confidence built through countless hours of practice. Today had been a culmination of that journey, a moment where preparation met courage. She realized that the piano had been more than an instrument. It had been a teacher, a friend, a confidant. Through it, she had learned patience, resilience, and the power of expression. She had learned that failure was not the end, that mistakes could be transformed into something beautiful, and that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. These lessons were woven into her music, into every note she had played, and into every story she had lived. She thought about the simple joy of creating music, the feeling of her fingers dancing across the keys, The way the sound filled the room, the way it moved through her body, she had always loved that sensation, the way it connected her to something larger than herself, something timeless. Today she had shared that joy with others, and the thought filled her with a deep sense of satisfaction. She had not only played music, she had communicated, connected, and shared a piece of her soul. Looking around the hall, she saw people still talking quietly, some lingering near the stage, others moving toward the exit. She knew that many of them had experienced a shift, that their assumptions had been challenged even if they did not fully understand it. She felt a quiet pride in that, a recognition that her music had touched lives in ways that words could not. It was a reminder that art had the power to change hearts, to break barriers, and to reveal truths that were often hidden. As she gathered her things and prepared to leave, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The performance had been draining, emotionally and physically, but it had also been invigorating. She had faced her fears, shared her story, and discovered a new sense of confidence. The memories of her past had been a guide, her struggles a source of strength, and the music a bridge between who she had been and who she could become. She stepped out of the hall and into the cool evening air. The world outside seemed different somehow, brighter, filled with possibility. She knew that the journey was far from over, that there would be more challenges, more doubts, more moments of fear. But she also knew that she had a voice, a talent, and a courage that could carry her through. And she carried it with her, a quiet determination and a heart full of music. Ready to face whatever came next, she returned to the stage the next day with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The hall seemed different now, less intimidating, but still filled with faces she did not know. Her hands felt familiar on the piano, as if the instrument remembered her from the day before. She sat down and let her fingers rest lightly on the keys, feeling the texture of the worn surface under her touch. There was a quiet hum of anticipation in the air, a feeling that something was about to happen, though no one yet knew what it would be. She began with a soft melody, simple at first, almost like a whisper. The notes floated through the room, gentle and unassuming, but they carried a sense of depth that made some heads turn. People who had been skeptical yesterday were watching more closely, now sensing that this performance might be different. She let the music flow naturally, allowing it to grow and change without forcing it. Each note was a small expression of her emotions, each chord a reflection of her journey. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound guide her. Felt herself becoming one with the music. The audience began to settle, the previous whispers and laughter fading into silence. They were listening now, not just to the notes, but to the feeling behind them. She remembered all the years of practice, the nights spent alone with the piano, struggles she had faced in life, and she poured all of it into the performance. Her fingers moved with confidence, her heart with purpose. She was no longer playing for judgment or approval. She was playing to express herself, to tell a story that words could not capture. As the melody grew stronger, she noticed subtle changes in the audience. Eyes widened, mouths opened slightly in surprise, and some people leaned forward, drawn in by the unexpected emotion. The piano seemed to respond to her every thought, every feeling, as if it knew the story she wanted to tell. She let herself get lost in the music, allowing it to flow freely, unrestrained by fear or doubt. The hall was filled with a mixture of anticipation, awe, and quiet admiration. The laughter that had once echoed in her ears was gone, replaced by attentive silence. She played a series of notes that were delicate and soft, almost fragile, yet they carried a weight of emotion that was impossible to ignore. Each chord seemed to speak directly to the listeners, conveying feelings of longing, hope, and resilience. She remembered the first time she had learned that a simple sequence of notes could move someone, could make them pause and reflect. That memory gave her courage, and she allowed herself to express even more openly. Her hands moved over the keys with precision and grace. Telling a story that had been hidden for years, the music began to build, growing in strength and intensity. The soft whispers of the beginning transformed into bold statements, notes that demanded attention without force, that spoke of strength born from struggle. She could feel the energy of the room shifting, the audience becoming part of the music without even realizing it. Some people closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, while others leaned forward, completely absorbed. She felt a sense of connection, a silent communication that transcended words as she played. Memories of her life's surface, moments of hardship, times of loneliness, moments when she had questioned herself and her worth. Each memory was transformed into music, a melody that carried her past and her growth. She thought about all the people who had doubted her, the friends who had laughed, the strangers who had whispered. She did not play to prove them wrong, but the music became a quiet answer to the questions they had never asked, an expression of the depth they had not expected. She noticed small gestures in the audience, a head tilting, an eyebrow raising, a hand resting on a chin in thought. These small signs told her that her music was reaching them, touching something they had not anticipated. She felt a surge of confidence, a feeling that she had never experienced before in a public performance. The piano had become an extension of herself, a voice that could communicate what words never could. She let herself play with abandon, exploring the range of emotions she had inside. Knowing that each note was part of a larger story, the melody shifted again, becoming tender and introspective. She remembered the nights she had spent alone, playing softly so as not to disturb anyone, letting her emotions flow through the keys. Those nights had taught her patience, resilience, and the power of subtle expression. Now, she could use those lessons openly, allowing the audience to feel the vulnerability she had carried for so long. The music was no longer just a performance. It was a conversation, shared experience between her and everyone listening. She thought about the people who had doubted her, who had assumed she was ordinary and unremarkable. The piano had taught her that true talent was not always obvious, that depth could exist beneath a quiet exterior. She played each note with intention, letting the music reveal what words could not. The audience responded in kind, their attention unwavering, their expressions softening. Some were visibly moved, others simply absorbed. All participating in the experience through the simple act of listening, the music continued to evolve, moving through moments of tension and release, of quiet reflection and bold declaration. She let herself feel every emotion fully, channeling it through the piano. Her heart beat in rhythm with the melody, her breath matching the flow of the music. She realized that this connection between her and the instrument, between her and the audience, was something she had longed for all her life. It was a moment of pure expression, unfiltered and honest. She remembered the encouragement she had received from a teacher long ago, who had told her that music could reach people in ways words never could. That memory filled her with determination. She allowed herself to experiment, to explore different textures and tones, to let the music speak in unexpected ways. The audience responded unconsciously, leaning in, holding their breath, letting themselves be drawn into the story she was telling. She felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond applause or recognition. It was the joy of connecting, of being understood without words. Her mind wandered briefly to the challenges she had faced outside of music, family struggles, financial difficulties, moments of doubt and fear. She realized that all of those experiences had shaped her, had given her depth and perspective. They had prepared her for this moment, had made the music richer, more nuanced, more authentic. She embraced that truth fully, letting it guide her fingers. Letting it shape the story she was telling with sound, the melody began to climb. Reaching heights of intensity and passion, she played with confidence, her hands moving faster yet gracefully, creating a sense of movement and energy that was captivating. The audience was silent, but she could feel their attention, their awareness, their shared presence. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a bridge, a medium through which emotions flowed freely, connecting everyone in the room. She felt a sense of unity, a quiet understanding that they were part of something larger than themselves as the music reached a climax. She allowed herself to fully express the emotions she had carried for years: joy, sorrow, hope, and resilience, all blending together in a powerful harmony. The notes resonated through the hall, echoing in the hearts of those listening. She felt a release, a catharsis, as if the music was cleansing not only her own soul but touching something deep within the audience. She had never felt such a strong sense of purpose and connection, and it filled her with a quiet awe. The final notes approached, softening and slowing, bringing the performance to a gentle conclusion. She let each chord linger, savoring the sound, the resonance, the feeling it left behind. The audience remained silent for a moment, as if holding their breath, absorbing the depth of what they had just experienced. She opened her eyes slowly, taking in the scene, seeing the expressions of surprise, admiration, and emotion on the faces around her. Some were moved to tears. Others were simply captivated, all touched in some way by the honesty of her performance. She leaned back slightly, letting her hands rest on the keys, feeling the last vibrations of the music fade into the air. A hush settled over the hall, a quiet acknowledgement of the power of what had just been shared. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not from recognition or praise, but from the knowledge that she had expressed herself fully, authentically, without fear or hesitation. The music had spoken, and the audience had listened, and in that exchange, something profound had occurred. She took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline and emotion slowly ebbing, replaced by a calm sense of accomplishment. She thought about the journey that had brought her here through years of practice. The moments of doubt, the quiet nights spent alone with the piano. All of it had led to this moment, this connection, this shared experience. She realized that the power of music lay not in technical skill alone, but in the ability to convey truth, emotion, and humanity through sound. As she rose from the piano and faced the audience, she could see the transformation in their expressions. The skepticism of the past day had been replaced by a quiet respect, a recognition of the depth and talent she possessed. She felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of being seen, not for appearances, but for the person she was, for the story she had carried within her for so long. It was a validation not of her ability alone, but of her courage, her perseverance, and her authenticity. She left the stage slowly, savoring the final moments of the experience, knowing that this was only the beginning of a new chapter. The music had opened a door, created a path, and shown her that the world could be reached through the honesty of expression. She carried with her the memory of the audience's response, the connection she had felt, and the realization that her voice, through the piano, could touch hearts in ways she had never imagined. And with that, she stepped into the next part of her journey. Confident in the power of her own story and the music that would continue to tell it, she sat quietly before the piano. The hall now filled with a weightless anticipation that was almost tangible. The applause from previous performances had faded into a hum of quiet expectation. She felt the soft pressure of the stage beneath her, the familiar feel of the piano keys, and the energy of the audience settling around her like a soft blanket. Her hands hovered for a moment over the keys, and she allowed herself to feel the rhythm of her own heartbeat, a steady companion to the music she was about to create. The first notes she played were gentle, tentative, like a whisper that wanted to be heard. She let them float through the hall, delicate and unassuming, but rich with emotion. The audience leaned in, drawn by the quiet intensity of her playing. There were no words, no gestures, just the music, pure and raw, carrying the story she had lived for so many years. Each note seemed to hold a piece of her history, her struggles, her dreams, and her quiet victories. She felt a connection, invisible yet powerful, between herself and the listeners. As she continued, the melody began to unfold, growing in strength and confidence. She allowed herself to feel each note fully, to let her emotions guide her fingers. Memories of her childhood, of lonely nights spent at the piano, came flooding back. She remembered the small victories, the first songs she had mastered, the nights of frustration and tears, and the quiet joy when a melody finally felt right. Those memories were woven into every chord she played, adding depth and resonance to the music. The audience remained silent, captivated by the story unfolding through sound. She could see subtle shifts in posture, slight nods, the tilt of a head, all signs that her music had begun to reach them in ways words never could. She felt a surge of courage, a quiet determination to continue, to let the music tell everything she had held inside. The piano became an extension of herself, a vessel through which her emotions flowed freely, connecting her to everyone in the room without a single word. The melody took on a more complex form, moving through gentle passages and moments of intensity. She allowed herself to explore the range of her emotions, from quiet reflection to bold declaration. Her fingers danced over the keys with confidence, each movement purposeful, precise, and expressive. She remembered the teacher who had once told her that music was a language, one that could speak truths words could not. Now, she understood those words fully. She was speaking, and the audience was listening. Her mind drifted to the people who had doubted her, who had laughed or whispered behind her back. She did not play for them, but she let the music carry the quiet strength she had built over the years. Each note was a declaration, not of defiance, but of resilience, of a life shaped by passion and persistence. The music held a message, that she had endured, grown, and found her voice, and that anyone willing to listen could understand the depth of her journey. The audience began to react subtly. A hand came to a face to wipe away a tear. A slight gasp escaped from someone who had been holding their breath. A few leaned forward, drawn completely into the moment. She felt the energy shift, a wave of emotion moving through the room, connecting her to the listeners in a quiet, profound way. The music was alive, carrying not only her story, but the emotions of everyone willing to open themselves to it. The melody grew even more intricate, weaving layers of emotion into each chord. She thought of the nights when she had practiced alone, the mistakes, the repetitions, and the small moments of triumph that had built her confidence. Those experiences had taught her patience, attention to detail, and the courage to continue despite setbacks. Now, all of that experience manifested in her playing, a testament to years of dedication and perseverance. She allowed herself to be fully present, letting the music guide her hands, her mind, and her heart. She played with a sense of freedom, exploring new textures and dynamics. Pushing Hurst, she stepped away from the piano for the last time, feeling a sense of calm she had never known before a performance. The applause and cheers had washed over her like a warm wave, but her thoughts were inward, reflecting on everything that had led to this moment. Every struggle, every lonely night spent at the piano, every tear and moment of doubt, all of it had culminated in a performance that was not about recognition or applause, but about expression and truth. She could feel a quiet pride in herself, confidence that had been built slowly over years of dedication and perseverance. As she moved through the hall toward the exit, people approached her, their faces bright with admiration and curiosity. Some spoke softly, offering words of praise that touched her deeply, while others simply nodded, eyes wide with awe. She felt a warmth in her chest that was more fulfilling than anything else. The knowledge that she had reached them in a way that transcended judgment or expectation. The performance had been more than music. It had been a connection, a shared experience that left both her and the audience feeling something profound. She thought back to the people who had doubted her, the ones who had laughed or whispered behind her back. She did not feel anger or revenge, only a quiet sense of accomplishment. The music had spoken for her, carrying the depth of her emotions, her struggles, and her resilience. It had revealed her truth, and in that revelation there was a freedom she had longed for all her life. She realized that validation from others, though pleasant, was secondary to the self-acceptance and inner peace she now felt. Outside the hall, the evening air was cool and refreshing. She walked slowly, savoring the sensation of the world around her. The ordinary streetlights, the distant sounds of cars and footsteps. Everything felt sharper, more vivid, more alive. The music was still echoing in her mind, a reminder that she had tapped into something larger than herself, something that could move and touch others without words. She had discovered a power she had always known existed, but had never fully experienced the power of genuine expression. Her thoughts drifted to the future, to the possibilities that now seemed open. She had always loved music, but performing in front of others had been a source of anxiety and fear. Today she had faced that fear and emerged stronger, more confident, and more capable. She realized that this was not the end, but a beginning. It's an opportunity to explore new ways of sharing her music, to reach new audiences, and to continue growing as an artist and as a person. The world felt wider and more inviting now, full of possibilities she had never dared to imagine. She remembered the quiet nights spent at the piano, when no one else was around, and the music had been her only companion. Those nights had taught her patience, discipline, and the importance of persistence. They had also taught her that music could speak where words could not, that it could express feelings too deep or complicated for ordinary conversation. Now, she had shared that gift with others, and the response had been more powerful than she could have anticipated. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, for the challenges that had shaped her, and for the music that had always been her guide. As she walked, she noticed a small group of young people outside the hall, holding instruments of their own. They looked nervous, excited, unsure of themselves. She smiled quietly, recognizing the familiar mix of fear and anticipation that she had felt so many times. She approached them gently, offering a few words of encouragement. She spoke of the importance of practice, of patience, of believing in oneself, even when others did not. She encouraged them to find their own voice through music, to let it carry their emotions, to share it with the world without fear. Their eyes lit up with appreciation, and she felt a sense of connection, knowing that her experience could inspire others. Just as she had once been inspired, she thought about the lessons she had learned from her own journey, the value of resilience, the importance of self-expression, the power of authenticity. Music had been the vehicle through which she had discovered these truths. She realized that it could also be the vehicle for others. She had faced judgment, fear, and doubt, but she had persisted, and in doing so, had found a sense of freedom and purpose. She wanted to pass that message on, to help others recognize that their talents and passions were worth nurturing. No matter what obstacles they faced, to express every nuance of feeling she had carried for so long. The audience responded with rapt attention, their eyes following her fingers, their bodies moving subtly with the rhythm, absorbed in the emotional journey she had created. She felt the room breathe with her, silent chorus joining her performance. As the performance reached a crescendo, she allowed the music to soar. Bold and expressive, filled with passion and truth. Her heart raced with excitement, her hands moving with confidence and grace. She could feel the connection between herself and the audience strengthening, shared understanding that transcended words. The music became a dialogue, a conversation in which each note carried meaning, emotion, and significance. She felt both vulnerable and empowered, aware that she was exposing a piece of herself, yet confident in the strength it conveyed. The audience was captivated. Caught in the spell of the music, she noticed faces filled with awe, some glistening with tears, others silently absorbing every note. The laughter and whispers of skepticism had vanished, replaced by a deep, attentive silence that spoke volumes. She realized that she had transformed the energy in the room, creating a space where emotion and understanding could flourish without interruption. The music had become a bridge, connecting her story to the hearts of those listening. She transitioned into a softer passage, letting the notes breathe, allowing moments of quiet reflection amidst the intensity. She remembered the nights when she had played softly to avoid waking others, pouring her feelings into the piano when no one could hear. Those quiet moments had taught her the subtlety of expression, the power of restraint, and the importance of listening. Now, she applied those lessons openly, letting the audience feel the delicate emotions she had long carried in solitude. Her hands moved with fluidity, creating a tapestry of sound that was rich, textured, and alive. Each note was carefully placed, each chord resonated with meaning. She allowed herself to feel joy, sorrow, hope, and longing simultaneously, channeling them into the music. The audience was drawn deeper into her world, experiencing the full range of emotion she had embedded in each phrase. It was a moment of shared humanity, a connection forged through sound rather than speech. As the final section approached, she slowed the tempo, allowing each note to linger, each chord to resonate fully. She could feel the weight of the moment, the culmination of years of practice, struggle, and growth. She let herself play with complete authenticity, without fear of judgment or expectation. The music spoke for her, conveying the depth of her experience, the richness of her emotions, and the beauty of her journey. The audience absorbed it in silence, moved by the honesty and intensity of the performance. The last notes faded into the air, hanging softly like a whispered message that lingered in the hearts of the listeners. She remained seated, hands resting lightly on the keys, letting the resonance settle. The hall was still, the silence profound, a shared acknowledgement of what had just been experienced. She felt a sense of completion, not in terms of applause or recognition, but in the fulfillment of expressing herself fully and being truly heard.